Hello and welcome to the Gestalt IT Rundown. Today is Wednesday, January the 19th, and it is National Popcorn Day. I hope that you're enjoying a buttery or sweet treat after you've eaten your lunch, of course. My name is Tom Hollingsworth. I am the host of this show, bringing you all of the things exciting that have happened in the last week of news. And joining me is the prognosticator professional himself, Mr. Stephen Foskett. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Tom. It's nice to be here. And I'd like to put a shout out for kettle corn. It really is an amazing thing.
Yeah, well, the best of both worlds is kind of something that we're all about here at the Rundown. So we'll be bringing you the best of both world news stories today. Starting off with a little question for you, Stephen. What state is round on both ends and has a giant chip facility in the middle? Well, according to reports, it might soon be Ohio, because the rumors are swirling that Intel is going to be investing $20 billion in a new site that will be located in New Albany, Ohio, just outside of Columbus. The size of the deal lends credence to it being the one that CEO Pat Gelsinger has been talking about, the so-called mega fab. And that would be a really big win for the state of Ohio because of the proximity to the Ohio State University. It would be a very big boon for highly skilled workers coming out of there and hopefully do a lot for the area in general. However, New York State is also rumored to be in competition for the facility, and New York State has a very long history of being a chip manufacturing powerhouse, unlike the Buckeye State. We're expecting the announcement to be made on January the 21st, and Intel is keeping mum on it, not having commented to any of the news outlets that are carrying the story. Stephen, is Ohio looking to change its nickname to the Buckeye Chip State with Intel's help?
Sure. No, I think it would be great. Disclaimer, live in Ohio, and Gestalt IT is headquartered here in Northeast Ohio. This location is a couple hours south of here, so it wouldn't necessarily benefit this local community. But frankly, I think it would be good to disperse production of chips around the United States. So far, a lot of chip production has been built out in sort of the desert areas, Arizona, Nevada, Texas. I think that it is probably a good idea to have some of it outside those power zones, outside, the typical area where you're competing for workers like Austin. So Ohio makes a lot of sense. Also, I'd like to point out that in the book Ready Player One, the center of the entire universe is Columbus, Ohio. So theoretically, this is leading us on the path to a multiverse madness like Ready Player One. Now, seriously, though, I think that it's a good place for it. Ohio has abundant land, abundant natural resources, a lot of water. Chip making actually uses a lot of water, and Ohio has very good freshwater supplies, unlike some of the desert areas. Also, it has a pretty good electric infrastructure here, and also, as you mentioned, a very good skilled workforce. Columbus especially has been the home to a lot of high-tech companies. The Ohio State University, as you mentioned, does turn out professionals, grads at a rapid pace. And I think it makes a lot of sense to locate something like that in a state like Ohio. On the other hand, as you mentioned, New York is also another, has a historic chip making ability there. It is where a lot of IBM chip making happens. And so it would also be a good location. My only fear is that there's some kind of tax incentive war going on between states like New York and Ohio, and it seems like those always benefit the companies and never benefit the states. So we'll see what happens. I think we should probably also make sure to put a bookmark in the fact that Gelsinger is planning on using federal chip-making subsidies to build this plant as well. So, way to go, Intel. And it's certainly not a bad move for them. And I guess way to go, Ohio, if it works out. Tom, IoT is an area where security is unclear at best. Given the power of these devices and the way that they must communicate with outside services, it could be enough to drive your security teams insane. DigiCert is taking a step to resolve this by acquiring IoT security provider Mocana. The move adds significant capabilities to allow for device identification, secure firmware management, and device tampering detection. Terms of the deal were not disclosed, but Mocana has raised $95 million in funding. Tom, you're our expert in wireless and security. What's your view?
So I think this is actually a really good deal for DigiCert. And I remembered that a couple of years ago, back at RSA 2020, in the old times before the pandemic, I actually had a chance to sit down and talk with Mike Nelson. No, not the guy from MST3K. No, Mike Nelson is the VP for IoT security at DigiCert. And we had a great conversation back then about some of the ways that DigiCert was trying to fix some of the problems with IoT. And I wrote a great article for this over at gestaltit.com if you want to go search for it. Basically, it boils down to the difficulty in applying what we used to do with security. I say used to do as in heavyweight devices like laptops and desktops and infrastructure devices, trying to squeeze all of that into something that is using the cheapest CPU available to provide sensor data or something like that. Now, fast forward 2 years, IoT has not gotten any smaller. In fact, it's gotten a whole lot bigger. And it's more important to realize that there's a lot of things that people are starting to analyze as threats to IoT. We mentioned some of them. The ability to disrupt firmware as it's being delivered to these devices, because it doesn't take much to corrupt them. The ability to determine whether or not that device has been tampered with. And if you think that that's not a big deal, imagine how much chaos you could cause if you suddenly got a hold of a few temperature sensors and caused them to start misreporting some data. There's a lot of potential there for misuse. And again, traditional security measures don't necessarily translate well to these devices, but there are companies that have come up with solutions, and Mocana was one of them. And I think that this pickup by DigiCert is a really good move because it allows them to integrate that team into what they're doing. And let's be honest, 95 million is what they raised. I'm sure they didn't get bought for 95 million. I'm sure it was a smaller multiple with the promise of having a bigger company like DigiCert to be able to drive R&D and innovation and things like that. So I'm really looking forward to kind of seeing how DigiCert is going to take the lead in this IoT arena, because, well, like I hinted at, I don't think IoT is going to get any smaller anytime soon. The devices might shrink, but we're going to see an explosion of them. And trying to keep track of all of them is probably going to be enough to make anyone want to pull their hair out. All right, Stephen. An Austrian lawyer has successfully managed to make Google Analytics illegal in the EU. Max Schrems represented an Austrian user who accessed a health website in Austria, but was running Google Analytics, and Google Analytics forwarded some personal information into the US. Now, you may think, well, isn't that what Google Analytics is designed to do? Well, yeah, it is, except that's illegal under the GDPR and a new 2020 Privacy Shield legislation that is specifically designed to prevent EU personal information from being forwarded into the US, where it can be included in mass surveillance programs thanks to the US government's capability to compel information from US based companies. Now, the judgment is likely to be appealed because who wouldn't? But now we're starting to see new pop ups. Remember the little cookie pop up that comes up underneath your thing? You have to agree to those thanks to GDPR. Well, now there's companies that are starting to have pop ups that say we may be doing away with Google Analytics because if we can't control this, we're not going to want to run this on our site and possibly end up being sued or worse. Stephen, does this mean that privacy is going to win the day here? Or is this the EU trying to go after some Silicon Valley tech giants on technicalities?
Well, I hope it's the former. Frankly, the way that the internet works and all of the privacy invading things that happen, frankly, really get under my skin. And I think that they bother a lot of other people as well. And frankly, a lot of them are not really compatible with any kind of privacy or data protection regulations. Remember, we've got GDPR, but California also has a similar law. And I imagine that there are going to be more and more laws like this all around the world. And it's hard to see how companies will be able to run businesses that are essentially privacy invading monsters in the wake of these kind of laws. How can Google Analytics be compatible with GDPR ever? I'm not sure exactly how they could do that. I guess they could regionalize it, but would that break the whole value of Google Analytics if the data was required to stay within the EU? And what about international sites? Frankly, there's, I guess, two schools of thought here. On the one hand, you could say, well, this is the last gasp of the dinosaur state trying to control people's data and trying to interfere with a truly global internet. And then on the other hand, you have privacy advocates saying, well, this shows just how bad these companies are and how much they're invading your privacy, and good thing that the EU is standing up for people. Um, I just don't see where this goes in a way that companies like Google, but not just Google, every privacy invading company out there, I just don't see how they can continue to operate in the face of laws like this. And I think that they're going to have to either change their business model or spend an awful lot of time and money and effort trying to change these laws. So that's really what I see happening next. I think that maybe a few of these things will fall on the side of the governments. And then I think the privacy invading companies will fight back, and they'll try to figure out a way to keep from having these laws implemented in the way that would stop them from having a business. Ultimately, I think the people who gain from this are those that are building, secure and private systems that don't rely on mass data collection in order to have a profitable business. So, maybe switch over to one of those services instead. Tom, 2 weeks after a tense discussion of global cybercrime with the Russian government in recent weeks, the FSB has decided to undo some evil. Specifically, they raided 25 locations on Friday and seized $5.6 million in assets, including 20 luxury cars from our favorite ransomware gang, R Evil, or whatever you're going to call them. After a summer where the gang made big news here on the rundown and then disappeared with their ill gotten gains, the question quickly turned to who would replace them and if they would ever face justice for their crimes. Experts had wondered if Russian authorities would try to disrupt these gangs inside their own borders, and the arrests have received praise from the international community. But are they just performance art? Is this a shift to reduce visibility, or is this just Putin being Putin?
It's difficult to kind of say this because when I was reading the story, I thought about the movie Black Mass. And I thought about the fact that you've got, these criminal organizations that are operating inside of Russia. That's kind of like Whitey Bulger. And then you've got the Russian FSB, which is kind of like John Connolly, the FBI agent that's supposedly helping out, except he's in cahoots with these people. Now, as a journalist, there is no proof that the Russian government is working with these ransomware gangs. There is also no proof that they have any reason to ever want to arrest these people. And most of the stories that will talk about this development will tell you that they've been operating inside of Russia for years and nobody seems to care. Until the US president finally put his foot down and said, I've had enough. I'm tired of these gangs shutting down operations here in the US. I mean, look at Colonial Pipeline, look at JBS Meats, look at Kaseya, look at anything that we've experienced over the last year. And finally, they've had enough. And let's be fair, Revil probably thought that they could just disappear and take some Bitcoins and a couple of Ferraris and pop up again later with a new crew and do it all over again. Except when you know where everybody's at, you know what they're doing, and sometimes you need to make a show of force so that, hey, it looks like we really are doing stuff. You're going to pick up some of the low-hanging fruit, if you will. So much like in Black Mass, we're not going after the big people. We're going after the little fish so that it looks like we're doing a good job. But unlike what you would typically see in an FBI situation where the little fish are going to roll over and give up the big fish, I think this is more along the lines of the little fish are going to go to prison and they're going to confiscate some of these Ferraris, which will probably end up in the St. Petersburg FSB office as the new company cars. And then, it'll go back to being business as usual in about 6 months because ultimately the Russians don't care. As long as they're not attacking targets inside of Russia or any Russian-friendly places, who cares? Because it's disrupting things in the West, and so be it. And let the U.S. president howl all he wants about how unfair it is, as long as we're still getting paid or not getting paid, but getting the disruption that we're looking for, it ultimately doesn't matter to us. And I think that that's part of the problem. There's no solution in any of this that will succeed until the hearts and minds of the people sheltering them are changed. And we've seen this with a number of crews, whether it's the APT crews operating out of China or Lazarus operating out of North Korea. As long as the government either condones or turns a blind eye to these kinds of operations, nobody cares. And maybe the solution is to fight fire with fire and develop our own homegrown talent to raid these other organizations and these other nations. And when Putin comes to us and says, you need to shut down these ransomware gangs that are locking up all of my stuff because they detected a Cyrillic alphabet keyboard, maybe President Biden can shrug his shoulders and go, I'll think about it, and then do nothing like Putin's done for so many years. All right, I'm going to get off my soapbox for a minute because we have a couple of stories that we need to take a closer look at. Stephen, the first one is about a new standard because the PCI Special Interest Group, PCI SIG, announced last week that they've finalized the specification for PCI Express 6.0. Now, the short version is that the data rates per lane have effectively doubled, which means that the X16 slots, which are the widest ones, can reach somewhat of an incredible 128 gigabytes per second of bandwidth. That's pretty impressive. The specification has been in development since 2019, and it's part of a cycle where PCI SIG is doubling the data rates of the lanes about every 3 years. Now, why that's important is because if you look at the market right now, GPUs are getting really fast because they're being used for more than just displaying graphics in video games. And when you look at the explosion of things like DPUs and SSDs and a whole bunch of other IO devices, they're consuming even more bandwidth. Now, the hope is that the new specification came right on time and will allow advantages not only for these hungry devices, but also for these smaller devices that maybe aren't using the full width 8 and 16 lane things. Because if the lanes are wider, I don't have to put nearly as many of them on my IO device, which means I don't have to invest as much in the hardware, which makes everything hopefully cheaper. Stephen, is this new specification really going to help relieve some of the pressure that we're seeing with the current devices running on PCI Express 5.0? Or is this kind of just playing catch up in the hopes that we can stall for another 3 years until PCI Express 7.0 comes out?
Yeah, I'm going to go out on record and say that PCIe 6 is a major step forward, an important step forward, and perhaps even a bigger step forward than 4 or 5 were. So let me explain why I say that. So as you've said, the take-home message for most people is that PCI Express has a future, that the bandwidth is doubling, and all is good. They're maintaining backward compatibility. They are giving us more bandwidth. We're still going to be able to have, multiple size links. So X1, X2, X4, X8, and X16, as you mentioned. Everything is fine with PCIe. But that being said, there's a real nuance here with 6.0, and that's that 6.0 is a huge step forward technically. So let me dive into that for a moment. From the very beginning, PCIe has used something called NRZ, non-return to zero coding. And over time, the first 2 versions used what was called 8B, 10B, like Fiber Channel. The later ones used 128B, 130B encoding as well, and this improved bandwidth. They also increased other signaling rates to allow them to get to 16 and then 32 gigatransfers per second on PCIe 4 and PCIe 5. And all of these were very much the same technically. Like I said, apart from the switch to 128B, 130B encoding with 3.0, most of the PCI revisions have been pretty much the same thing. A lot of this was done to maintain backwards compatibility, but a lot of it was also done, frankly, to maintain costs, because adding any real extra capabilities, technology, changing the signaling rates and things like that, well, it incurred a cost in terms of the chipsets that were needed to do it. And frankly, PCI didn't need it. PCIe was working great, and it continues to work great. So essentially, PCIe 3, 4, and 5 are basically the same thing, except faster. Basically just turn the volume knob up a little bit and it goes faster. And that's what we've got. And all of those have been pretty widely adopted. Now, Intel was late to market with PCIe 4. AMD used that as a battering ram with their Zen chips, but Intel's there now. And frankly, now Intel is here with PCIe 5, and AMD is late for that one. But PCIe 6, well, that's a whole other can of worms. So first off, PCIe 6 uses something completely different. Instead of using NRZ encoding, PCIe is using PAM4. Now, if you're a networking nerd, then you know what PAM4 is, because this is the same thing that's used in Ethernet. Essentially, if you're a storage nerd, you might recognize this too. The idea is that instead of having ones and zeros represented by a lot of signal and no signal, we have three different levels of signal. So we can have a lot of signal, some signal, a little less signal, and no signal. And that lets us encode more data into the same signaling that we've had before, which is frankly pretty much how TLC flash works and all sorts of other things. So this instantly moved the standard forward, but it of course also requires a lot more technology to implement it. The other thing they've done is implemented something called FLIT, Flow Control Unit. Now, there again, this is not an unusual, brand new, novel technology, but it is a technology that changes PCI Express in a major way. Because what FLIT does is it divides up all of the data going over the PCIe bus into packets, universal sized packets that can then be used in different ways with different error encoding and error correction. FLIT, interestingly enough, is going to also be implemented in older versions of PCIe, which means that the PCIe 6 transition is actually going to improve the reliability and the flexibility of PCIe 5 and PCIe 4 and maybe even PCIe 3 because of this backward compatibility. So hopefully, as you can see now, this is a huge step forward. But there's a warning. It always takes a while for PCIe technology to come to market. As I mentioned, Intel was late with 4.0. Now, that came out in 2017. Intel only really added it to their platforms in 2020 and 2021. Now, PCIe 5 is here. Well, PCIe 5 has been around since 2019, but yet it's brand new in 2022. We're not going to see PCIe 6 in your friendly neighborhood server or peripheral chip for a few more years now. But when it does come, it's going to be a big move forward. And remember, too, that a lot of important technologies, Compute Express Link, for example, are linked to PCIe, and that those are really transformative for the data center. So from my perspective, as something of an analyst of systems engineering and systems hardware, I think that PCIe 6 will become not just a major step forward in terms of throughput, but a transformative technology in terms of the infrastructure stack.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you there, Stephen. And one of the things that I think is really important is the fact that we're starting to see an explosion in the number of these data processing units, DPUs, that are going to be offloading a significant amount of data from the system. And having something that kind of natively speaks a little bit more clearly with, things like Ethernet, and has more bandwidth capability, gives us a lot of additional flexibility when it comes to moving that data out quickly, because that's the problem that we have. We can build a card that can do a lot of processing, but we still have to get the data there, and that's basically what we're trying to do, is get the data to the card as quickly as possible, and then get the card to get it out of the system as quickly as possible, and then vice versa in the reverse when you need to do something with it. And I think that ultimately this is a good thing. Sometimes we need to kind of step back and understand where the industry is going. And instead of, to quote Henry Ford, building a slightly faster horse that eats less hay, we need to do more. And I think that, that's kind of what you've said here, is that they're changing some of the encoding mechanisms around. They're making things work a little bit more smoothly with the way that systems operate today. And I think that this is going to be very helpful for people in the long term. But like you said, the long term is nothing you can buy on the market today, and nothing that is going to be released in the next 3 months, because it's going to take a while to get these specifications completely finalized and implemented in the current device design chain, and then get things out there. It's the same problem that we see a lot in the wireless industry. It's like, oh, we announced a new standard, and everyone's like, oh, I can't wait to use it. Yeah, you're going to have to wait about a year before it's actually deployed. So here's hoping that people can get this hardware to market relatively soon. Maybe by the time that they're able to do that, the chip shortage will be on the downswing, so that we'll actually be able to ramp up production and get these devices out so that people can take advantage of them. The odds are probably pretty good, though, that if you're already in the shift away from doing on-premises hardware deployments, you won't really get to take full advantage of this unless you're doing something, in a reasonably expensive cloud instance for the time being.
Tom, as mentioned in the rundown previously, the 5G spectrum expansion in the C band is starting to heat up. The U.S. Federal Aviation Administration has been stating for weeks that the deadline of January 19th is going to see flight disruptions as the impact of the transmission medium on aircraft instrument systems is still being evaluated. AT&T and Verizon, the major players in this expansion here in the United States, were ready to push ahead with the deployment of these new frequencies and create exclusion zones around major airports to study the effects. With mere hours to go today until flipping the switch, both providers have agreed to delay the activation of those towers around major U.S. airports to avert disruption to flight schedules. That's right, a number of airlines canceled flights to the U.S. today over this controversy. The affected aircraft appears to be older aircraft like the Boeing 777, which is used by many as a long haul international plane. The FAA has claimed that it didn't have adequate time to test the C-band interference with instrument landing systems at airports before it was approved for use, and the deployment of the technology could have led to major delays and disruptions, or even worse. Tom, is this a big issue, or is this another case of cell phones on planes?
The issue here is not the technology. The issue here is the fact that you've got two groups of people who are heavily invested in things that don't want to budge. And so I remember hearing some of the discussions around the 6 gigahertz spectrum allocation, and hearing Chuck Lukaszewski at Aruba talk about all the testing that Aruba had to do to prove that they weren't going to interfere with satellite downlink stuff. And you're telling me that even though this spectrum went up for auction months and months ago, the FAA, probably a true government agency that doesn't get off of its tail until it has to, couldn't figure out what was going on. Now, here's the Cliff's Notes version. The C band opens up everything from 3.7 gigahertz to 4.2 gigahertz. The instrument landing system, specifically the radio altimeters, operate from 4.2 to 4.4. So you've got a tiny little amount of overlap right there at the top of the C band and into the bottom of the altimeter band. The problem is right now the C band that's being implemented is about 100 megahertz of spectrum from 3.7 to 3.8. So there's a pretty wide spectrum gap right there before you bump into the radar. And anybody who's tried to deploy a 5 gigahertz band in times past knows that there are huge carve outs for radar stations because they don't want anybody to interfere with any of the kind of radar that we have to deal with. So the problem is that the FAA doesn't want anybody to deploy anything C-band until they get around to figuring out how this is going to impact their systems. Want to bet that that's not going to happen by March of next year because it's the FAA and because these installations are probably never going to be upgraded. Like you said, the older aircraft are the ones that haven't been cleared yet. Most of the relatively new aircraft, like the new 737s and 787s and things like that, are cleared to operate because they're not going to interfere with any of this stuff. AT&T and Verizon have even said, we're going to create these exclusion zones around airports, like 50 of the biggest airports in the US. We're going to test the deployments. We're going to make sure that we're not interfering. And they've even gone so far as to say, we won't even enable like the higher C-band around the airports. But of course, the FAA managed to get this into the news by saying, if you do this, their planes could crash. Like they started off with the easy stuff of, well, there could be massive flight disruptions because this system is only used in low visibility landings. On a clear day, they are going to be able to fly the plane and land it with visual. This is part of that whole instrument landing system. And if you've ever watched the seminal Christmas movie classic Die Hard 2, you know what happens when people mess with ILS. It's bad. But the likelihood of this happening anytime soon is minuscule. So what happened was, I think you saw a bunch of international companies that were not ready to even try to deal with this. So they canceled a bunch of flights that they couldn't get switched to newer equipment. I believe it was the Emirates Airlines said that we can't get a 787 to run this route, which would be perfectly fine. So we're just going to cancel the flight. And then AT&T and Verizon begrudgingly said, you know what, we're just going to pause the rollout. But the unsaid thing here is, all right, FAA, it's time to get off of your rear end and figure out what's going on. By the way, here are all the technical specifications for what we're going to be doing. You need to make sure that your systems are compatible with that, because when it comes to these spectrum allocations in the C band, AT&T and Verizon can very narrowly define what gets transmitted. Again, 3.7 to 3.8, 3.8 to 4.0. They can leave a gap in between the top of their spectrum and the radar. The problem is that just like the microwave oven in your house, I'm sure these radar systems broadcast across the whole 200 megahertz spectrum that they've been allocated and just don't care because they are not regulated by consumers. They are regulated by the FAA, and the FAA is like, whatever, we don't care as long as it works. So there's going to have to be a lot of investigation that's going to happen in order to make sure that these systems are compatible with each other. And I'm sure that the bulk of that is going to fall on AT&T and Verizon, who are not government agencies, who actually can get things done in a timeline that isn't measured in years. And ultimately, what we're probably going to see is that there will continue to be these 5G exclusion zones around airports, and companies will probably have to avoid deploying C-band technology. And then eventually what's going to happen is all we're going to be doing is complaining about the fact that our cell phones suck when we get close to the airport because now all of a sudden the speed drops. And the FAA is still not going to fix their radar systems because why should they have to? All they have to do is go to the press and tell people that planes will start falling out of the sky. And I know that that's the case because people that I know that are not techies were sending me the story asking if they were going to be in a plane crash. And I'm like, no.
Well, first of all, I do have a warning for everyone listening to this, and that is please do not watch Die Hard 2. It is a very bad movie. Second of all, when it comes to the issue here, I think that the important thing to understand is that this sort of collision is probably not the best word. This sort of potential interference problem is pretty natural given the number of wireless devices that we have here and the prevalence and the popularity of LTE and 5G technology. Frankly, we need to be able to have wireless spectrum for all sorts of uses, and it's always going to be difficult to balance this stuff, especially since there are not international standards about which areas of the frequencies are available for which use. In fact, there are plenty of standards, but they don't always agree. So, for example, in some countries, the areas of spectrum used by these altimeters are already overlapped by other devices and could potentially cause issues on landings. And this has been known for a very long time. Similarly, as Tom said, one of the other issues is the potential of unintended overlap when devices aren't supposed to use the same spectrum, but there could be harmonics or there could be mistuned devices or malfunctioning devices that could cause problems in these other areas. And this is not crazy. I just looked it up. And as you mentioned, Tom, Emirates, Cathay Pacific, Qatar Airlines, Air France, United, American, they all use these older 777s that could be still using these frequencies. And these frequencies absolutely could be stomped on by a poorly designed phone or transmitter or tower or something like that. So it's not an academic thing. Also, I do worry a little bit about these exclusion zones because, of course, have you ever had your phone give you the wrong geolocation when you look at maps? I know I have. And if the phone doesn't know where it is, your phone could be trying to use frequencies that could interfere, maybe. That being said, all of this is a problem of sort of old technology versus new technology. Again, as you said, Tom, the ILS altimeter system that in question here has been replaced in most places and probably won't be a problem even in the places that it's not replaced because, again, there's no overlap. It's just a potential. So I think that it's probably good that the Verizon and AT&T have backed off and decided not to turn on these towers since maybe it's a problem. I also think that it's very bad that the airlines and the FAA went nuts over this potential interference issue because, frankly, if you cry wolf enough times, people are going to stop listening to you. And I can't tell how many times in the last week I've heard people say, oh, I see. Is this like the fact that I have to turn off my phone in flight because the plane's going to crash if I don't? People are already taking this with a grain of salt. That's not good for anyone. Because if there's a potential for an air crash, we had better take it seriously instead of laughing it off and saying, here it is, they're crying wolf again. So that's my perspective on it.
Well, here's hoping that they can get this issue resolved within a reasonable amount of time and that everyone comes out of it safely. All right, Stephen, we have a couple of things coming up that we wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of in the week ahead. The biggest one, literally next week, is Networking Field Day 27. We mentioned it last week, but we're going to have a full lineup of presenters talking about all things related to networking. We're going to have a great group of delegates. Some of them will actually be joining us on site in California. That happens January 26th through the 28th. And if you want to find out more information about that, please make sure you head over to the website, techfieldday.com. You can get a full rundown of everything that's going on over there. Pun fully intended. Stephen, what about you? What's coming up in the weeks ahead for you?
Well, I am pretty excited that we are also going to California for Cloud Field Day. So February 16 through 18, tune in at techfieldday.com to catch the latest from a bunch of companies talking about cloud, hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, Kubernetes, public cloud, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And the week after that, the week of President's Day here in the US, if you are a wireless professional and you'd like to learn a little bit more about some of the advances that are going on there and be in part of a really great community event, please make sure you check out the Wireless LAN Professionals Conference, WLPC, which is happening February 22nd through the 24th in Phoenix, Arizona. You can head over to WLANpros.com to find out more information about registration and see if there are still any boot camps available. Keith Parsons and his crew run a pretty great event, and if you are at all interested in wireless, I highly recommend you give it a shot. We will be back next week. That's the royal we, because Stephen will be joined with a special co-host. I will be at Networking Field Day, so Chris Grundeman will be stepping into my seat to help Stephen with the news that happens between now and then. But we will also be back the week after that at 12:30 Eastern Standard Time, or Eastern Daylight Time, depending on when you're watching this. It's just, Eastern. And we will be running down the news of the week. And remember, if you have any news stories that you'd like to see us cover, please make sure you follow us on Twitter. We're at Gestalt IT. Tweet us a link to the news story. Use the hashtag rundown. We do keep an eye on those, and we'd love to see some things that you have that are interested. And also, if you have any comments about some of the stories that we bring up in the show, please leave them down below. If you're watching this on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/GestaltIT video. Some of our favorite commenters like Anders Nilsson and Al Rashid love to kind of give us feedback and help us understand kind of where things are going. So, we'd love to hear from you there. Also, if you're not a subscriber to the Gestalt IT YouTube channel, please make sure you do that, as well as subscribing to our Tech Field Day video YouTube channel at youtube.com/techfieldday. We'd love to be able to notify you whenever we publish new videos. But for now, for myself, Tom Hollingsworth, for Stephen Foskett, and our great crew here at Gestalt IT, as well as our amazing community, thank you very much for tuning in. We hope that you have a great day and an amazing week, and we will see you next time.